Warning. Listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to Influencers Radio. Today, we have a guest that is going to be talking about things that is really emerging out there. If you pay attention to social media, you pay attention to the news, you will see and hear a lot more discussion around the brain. All right. Now, this isn't about, brain surgery, that kind of thing. This is about how the brain affects our everyday lives in ways that, a lot of people would attribute to other things, to outside influences, as far as outside circumstances and things like that. It's becoming more and more common and more recognized that, a lot of things that has to do with a successful and happy life is not necessarily outside circumstances, but what's going on inside of our brain. And so today's guest is Dr. Sean Orr. He is a neurologist, but a much different neurologist than you've probably thought of or seen before. He focuses on something called brain fitness. In the way that people would think about physical fitness, he focuses on the brain fitness because of exactly that, how important and even more important it can be to our everyday success. Dr. Orr has worked with entrepreneurs, professionals from all industries, executives, politicians, entertainers, athletes. In fact, he was right there when the NFL, when professional football players, when it was recognized that concussions really had a big impact on long-term impact on these athletes' lives. And right there at the beginning, when they really started digging into this and seeing what the effects and the long-term effects of this really can be. Now, you may be thinking that, these guys spend years getting their head banged around, knocked on the ground, knocked into each other. Of course, there's a connection between that and their quality of life and the impact on their lives after that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that non-athletes, the entrepreneurs, people that are successful in what they do can still be affected long-term, have impact on not just their professional life, but their personal life because of brain fitness. In fact, Dr. Orr has come up, and we're going to talk to him right about this. He's come up with this concept in our culture called, the neuroeconomy is what he calls it. And Dr. Orr, I want to just welcome you to Influencers Radio. And thank you very much for coming on today, because I want to jump right into this neuroeconomy, because this is just one of the most fascinating things. And it makes so many, I've had so many V8 moments as I've gone over your stuff and how much this makes sense. So welcome to Influencers Radio.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, let's jump right in here. The neuroeconomy. Now, a lot of people it's not traditional to associate neuro with economy, the financial aspects of brain, but that's kind of the root of that, because that's kind of where it all starts, and how the brain can affect people's business, the way they do business, but also how that has a natural tendency to bleed over into their personal life, their family life, their general well-being. So first, let's talk about that concept of the neuroeconomy. Can you explain that to folks?
Sure, Jack. So for all of human history, economies have really been driven by horsepower, by heart power. How much can we lift? How much can we move around? How big a boat can we build? How heavy do our trains lift? So we've had a cardiocentric economy, or a cardio economy, for really all of human history until just recently. And finally, with the introduction of the internet and the World Wide Web and robotics, a lot of technical innovations have all come together over the recent years. And I believe that we're now we've made a transition into what we call the neuroeconomy. And this is really where, your well-being, your economic success in life and the economic success of nations depends mostly upon how well citizens use their minds to manipulate the environment and to create success.
Well, yeah, I think that's brilliant. And, when I first, heard that and heard your explanation, it immediately, years ago, before, like you said, this economy, the internet and all of this, somebody, their ability to work, their ability to earn money oftentimes was related to if they woke up and sprained their ankle, that would affect their finances that day. Yeah. But now I think more and more people recognize, or I should say, don't necessarily recognize, they're aware that how they're feeling mentally affects their success during that day, whether they get things done, whether they're overwhelmed, whether they are frustrated. And sometimes they may not recognize that tie into what their ability to their financial ability for that day because of how what they're thinking. So it's not necessarily a sprained ankle. It could be that they wake up in a fog or some other different state of mind that can severely affect their success for that day, that month, that year. How do you recognize this and how that is associated with someone's ability to, get things done, especially with the successful folks you work with and the executives, entertainers, entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it's, I think what happened with the NFL is kind of the great example here. We've known for 100 years that the chronic brain injury from professional sports is an issue, and if you look back at newspapers 50, 60 years ago, it was always a concern. So why is it that things have changed now? And I think it's because finally the average citizen is aware that how we think has such a huge impact on our revenue generation. How we use our brains, how we use our minds matters more today than it ever has before. The margins in life are thinner than ever before, and the consequences of, not having a well-functioning brain are more grave than they've ever been before. I see this with my, entrepreneurs and executives I work with. They, the self-demands for close to perfect, performance are huge. So I really think that's where my realization came from, that what's changed is that we finally have entered this new era with a confluence of many different technologies that can expand our capacity for productivity. But if your brain functions not right, if you don't have the good brain fitness to be able to use those technologies, things start to fall apart.
Right. Well, I think, this is, the folks have been aware of this for years, right? Hundreds of years. And I say that because of, folks like Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. And that seemed to address this on a macro level. And there's been a lot of people that recognize that, positive thinking can get you further than negative thinking, right? And while that is generally true, you go much deeper in that. It's not in the kind of undebatable fact that, yes, thinking positively will benefit you more than thinking negatively. But then you go deeper into the issue in the fact that, how do I make myself think positively? How do I give myself the ability to think that way? It's not just a matter of waking up and saying, I'm going to think this way today, which a lot of people, I know that's a popular concept, that all you have to do is get up and say, I'm going to think great today. But there's a lot more to it that you dig down in there. And, some people may even think that this would associate like with psychiatry or psychiatrist. And I want you to talk a little bit about the difference between that. But let's dig deeper with that than that accepted, notion that, you just have to think positive, and talk about why people sometimes just can't muster up the ability to think positive or focus in that way.
Sure, Jack. So I think what you're getting at there is frame of mind. And the ability to think positively, from a certain point of view, takes some training. It requires the ability to actually put yourself in the right frame of mind. And that, I guess, is based on the premise that you've got the, right amount of brain energy. We know so much more about the brain than we ever have, and we still honestly have really a lot to learn. There's a lot that we don't know about. But what we can talk about is how the brain manufactures and stores energy and uses it. And the truth is that we do have a finite amount of, energy molecules that we can produce on a daily basis. We create different chemicals of the brain that are called neurotransmitters. Those signal back and forth through the brain different functions, and they affect our thinking. So, a lot of what I do now is based on the idea of disorders, right? So somebody may have had Parkinson's disease or depression or Alzheimer's disease, and those are the extremes of failure of brain energy. So if you think about somebody who's highly successful trying to get into the right frame of mind, because the brain is so vulnerable to being just drained of energy from all of the things that we have to deal with in our environment, then it starts to make it a little bit more understandable why somebody might not be in the right frame of mind and maybe on the path to burnout.
And so when you talk about burnout, and I want to dig into that quite a bit deeper, because I think, through what I've discovered and through discussions with you, burnout, whether it's recognized or not, it oftentimes is the signal or the root of where, people recognize that there's a problem, but may not understand or can be able to formulate a solution around it, that may be the core of it. Now, talking about dealing with burnout, we've had this whole culture of biohacking, right? The people understand biohacking. I think that means a lot of different things to different people. Anything from, pharmacology to the person that, downs the energy drink, I guess would be different extremes or forms of biohacking. People kind of that are smart enough maybe to self-diagnose to understand that this may be a problem and think that that's the solution. And that goes back to years from people that just drank coffee all day because they think it affected their brain in a certain way. Let's talk a little bit about that. First, let's talk about burnout and how that can affect someone's just life in general, and then how some folks kind of do these self-diagnoses and dig into biohacking and some of the dangers and benefits of that.
Sure. So, we often throw around the term burnout, and I think a lot of folks use it kind of loosely, but burnout really is a well-defined process, and it encompasses 3 stages. So in the first stage, there's some kind of, extreme stress, and people are living at a heightened level of stress. It can lead to insomnia, forgetfulness, headaches, and inability to concentrate, but it's usually in the context of some performance demand. And, somebody has ramped up their performance, and then they're starting to feel the early stages of the consequences. And the tricky part here, Jack, is when somebody starts down that path of burnout, they begin to lose perspective and actually lose the ability to perceive that they're burning out. Because as the brain energy starts to get drained, those parts of the brain that are feedback, they start to fail. So before long, people who are burning out will start to go into stage 2, where they start to conserve energy. They may be procrastinating. They may have decreased sexual desire. They're not showing up in time for work. They become apathetic, maybe use other things like you mentioned, coffee, caffeine, and alcohol, just to try to jolt the brain up into a higher level of functioning. And at this point, if something doesn't happen, they continue down the stage, they get to exhaustion. And that's where really we see a lot of physical manifestations. And ultimately, folks who are burning out will drop out of society, and they may even commit suicide. So, it's a really well-defined path, and I frequently will encounter, high performers who have just spent so much brain energy without taking the time to try to recover, that they're well down the path of burnout, and it's affecting their performance. So go ahead.
No, I think what you just described there, it just hit me. You just put a spotlight on, I think, what a lot of successful entrepreneurs are facing and may not recognize it, because that is the path. It's, when they first, start down a path, when they, the concept where they're building a business, the energy is nonstop because there's, so much that they can do and there's so much that they can accomplish. And they get to a point where, that starts running out, or they get on that treadmill and maybe not recognize it. And they're realizing that I know, my vision for this business or my career or my life was so much bigger than this. I know that the potential is there, but for some reason I'm I'm stalling, or for some reason something is slowing me down, or for some reason now I can't focus on, what needs to get done, what has to get done, what I want to get done. And that sounds exactly like what you described, that phase of burnout where they do start slowing down. They go from all that energy making things happen to that. What was the middle phase that you called that?
Well, so after the first phase, the middle phase is energy conservation, where you just start to pull back from society and start to procrastinate.
That's exactly. I just need a break. You know what? I just need to take some days off. You know what? I need to just not pay attention to this today. And then when you talked about, which we'll go into the biohacking, that, you know what? Here's a solution. I need to fix this with this, energy drink or this coffee, and which can often lead to, just a worsening of the problem. So I just should jump in there and put a spotlight on that, because I didn't want that to go unnoticed, because I think right there you just described probably so many people that find themselves and are just now realizing that after hearing you talk about that. So that's just incredible. So when they're in this position and we talk about the biohacking, and even when you talked about the beginning, it sounds to me like some people, ADD medication fixes that, or some other kind of, pharmacology to the biohacking. Talk a little bit about that biohacking, and like we said, some of the things that may benefit, but some of the things that may actually impede their performance or their ability to hit the outcome that they're looking for.
Sure. So, biohackers are a really great group of people because they're so motivated and they really want to improve their own performance. And I think biohacking has emerged just, as a cultural phenomenon because in this new neuroeconomy, higher performance is required. So how do you get to that place, right? How do you sustain your energy, and how do you allow yourself to perform at a higher level without suffering burnout? Biohackers have developed a lot of hacks or tricks in order to, rig their own nervous system to work better. And some of them are perfectly fine, and they pertain to kind of basic things like exercise and diet. But when you start to work your way up the ladder to the pharmacological agents and such, there are plenty of medications now that we've used to treat people with medical conditions, and when they're used in the setting of biohacking, do improve performance for many folks, but it's risky. You may encounter side effects if you're a biohacker, and some of the side effects can be permanent. You'll see some of the younger biohackers who are starting to use electrical devices that actually pass energy into the brain through the skull. If you're not careful, you may end up actually damaging brain tissue, and so we're still working those strategies out on the medical side. And I think biohackers are, in some respects, maybe taking risks that may permanently affect their performance in a negative way. So that's where I tend to be more of a fan of neuroenhancement, which is what we do on the professional side with the guidance of a physician.
So this is the shade tree mechanic biohacker. Let's hook it up. Let's see. Red is positive, black is negative, right? And hope that they get a jump start, which, there's people out there that are doing that. So, these are some of the things that they do to, once they recognize this burnout. But if we go back to the recognition of burnout, are we talking about, people that, it's time management. They're not managing their time, or they're losing control of their time, or one thing that I know a lot of entrepreneurs and professionals do is they find themselves in a position where they start overcommitting to projects, to different expectations, results that may add to that. What are some of the symptoms of real burnout, and that people may find themselves in and recognize? They may not know they're in burnout, but they may recognize these symptoms that will help them recognize that they may be heading towards burnout or in a burnout mode.
It's really important to recognize those, because ultimately the common theme here with burnout is the failure to be aware, that you're actually on the path. So when you start to find yourself feeling like you're missing deadlines, if you're starting to run into conflicts with family members where you didn't before, starting to feel cynical maybe and resentful because of the burden that's been placed on you, or if you find that you're starting to increase your consumption of alcohol or caffeine products, those ought to be real signals that you're on an unhealthy path here. Certainly, I mean, it's a tragedy what's recently happened with Robin Williams, and I'm certainly not going to try to suggest he was on burnout, but being aware that you have depression and getting help for it, being aware that you have sadness and mental fatigue and asking for help are really critical, because those are some of the end stage burnout signs, chronic headaches, chronic physical fatigue, and just really the desire to drop out of your activities. Those have to be red flags that tell you that you've essentially gotten to the end of the road of your brain energy. It's time to bail out. It's time to get help from somebody who can give you an objective opinion and start you on a path of brain building strategies to improve your brain fitness.
And when you're talking about that, you're not even talking about like dropping out or neglecting professional. This could kind of roll into your personal life, whether it's family, friends, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So if you find yourself just, rather than going to dinner with your wife this week, it's just a lot easier to hunker down and watch TV. So
let's get into this, because one of the things that fascinated me is how you've kind of put together the strategy that, obviously we've talked about recognizing these problems and they exist, but you have put together these strategies or concepts like recovery, optimization, enhancement. That's all have to do with your neuro health, right? So I guess those would be the steps. First kind of try to recover where you are, then optimizing, and then going above and beyond and enhancing, which I guess like biohackers attempt to do on their own. Some successful. Can you talk kind of about those three phases that can get somebody back on the path and actually above and beyond that, where they thought they could be going?
Yeah, sure. And I would just say that, a lot of these ideas are not new, and I think they're out there. But, I've taken some of the concepts that come from the patients I take care of who have had strokes or traumatic brain injury, and you apply them to people who haven't had brain injury. So, on one side of the spectrum, if you're just trying to repair or rescue somebody from a brain injury, that's one thing. But you apply some of the same strategies of protecting nervous tissue, and then you can then really get somebody's brain function optimized. A patient or a person who's stressed out in the phase of burnout is really suffering a brain pathology, a brain injuring process. So our first step is to simply recover that person and get them into an optimized state. So our fundamental brain building strategies, which are pretty basic, they're simple. They're about attending to things like sleep, diet, and exercise. What kind of material you're putting in your mouth? Are you relying on fast food and sugary beverages just to keep afloat? Well, that's a recipe for further brain damage, literally brain damage. So optimization is simply about taking a person and getting them into a situation of better awareness and starting a process of changing behaviors and patterns in order to get a normal brain function, essentially get the brain as it was designed by Mother Nature. So that's where optimization is. And then neuroenhancement is just taking it a step further. It's saying, okay, now we've got the optimized brain, so we've got the right kind of fuel on board to make our neurotransmitters. We've got the right kind of sleep patterns in place to clear out the debris from the brain at the end of the day. We've got the right exercise patterns to make the brain work better. Now, how can we build on that foundation with intermediate level strategies such as deep meditation, nutraceutical products, which are nutrients that are pharmaceutical grade? And then how do we go a step further and use devices and medications at a higher level to enhance brain function?
So it really is. It's like, let's get you back on your feet. Let's get you stable. And then let's work on improvement, which I think you've clearly established that there is a lot of potential to go above and beyond just back to stability. You've had folks, and I know you've helped hundreds of people do this, that you actually take them beyond what they thought their potential was, and in the enhancement part, take them to places that they may have thought were kind of beyond reach from what they're doing. And, do you attribute that all within kind of brain? It goes back to Think and Grow Rich, think positive. This goes way beyond thinking positive with this. And it goes beyond just I will myself to think positively. These are actually, physical and neurological and forgive my ignorance of the science terms, but it's a lot more than just will to do this. And there's very specific techniques and things that you can do to, manufacture this and actually create these states for yourself.
That's right, Jack. And frankly, I think it comes down to the idea that if you're in the vicious cycle of burnout, you've lost perspective. You may be suffering all of these negative consequences of burnout, and it really takes somebody who's outside of you and objective to be able to help to pull you through from a place of power loss into a place of empowerment. And that really has big implications for the bottom line, for the financial, well-being of an institution and of an individual. When somebody's in that power loss place of burnout, unless somebody objectively on the outside can say, okay, we need to get you out of that vicious cycle and into a place of empowerment through brain building strategies, they can get stuck there forever. So much of the work that I do with the people I take care of is in helping them to, through a lot of really highly focused, personalized interviews and diagnostic work, and frankly, even interviewing their coworkers and families. It's about understanding where they are now and where do they want to go. How would they, and maybe helping them to see that there's a better way simply by understanding the brain function better, understanding neurotransmitters, understanding what feeds brain function and how to optimize and then enhance it.
That's, that right there is fascinating. And, I think one of the things, especially for me, and I know that there's a lot of folks out there, is that if you've had those times where you just can't will yourself to think positive, or you just can't will yourself to, change your frame of mind, to know that it's not necessarily that you've done all you can do, that you've hit the limit of your ability, but that there's maybe things that I had no control of before or didn't realize were affecting this, that now there really is something that can be done, and things that can, and quite simply too, once they're recognized, be able to change that and remove that confusion, remove that burnout, that powerlessness, the frustration that people feel, but just don't understand why they're feeling that and why they can't overcome that, to just think positive. So that's why I call you an influencer, and I'm so grateful to have you on the show, because, what you're doing, can change not just the lives of the people that this affects, but obviously change the lives and affect the lives, and have a big impact on the people that are around them, their coworkers, their employees, their family, their friends. And it really is a tremendous that there is bigger answers. There are more powerful things that can be done when a lot of people think that they may just have hit that capacity. So, how can people find out more about, what you're doing, and, with this NeuroEconomy and, the brain fitness?
Probably the best way, Jack, is for folks to go to my website, and that's, www.axionneurotherapy.com. Axion is spelled A-X-I-O-N. That's all one word, axionneurotherapy.com. I've got plenty of resources there, and that's where folks can get in touch with me if they want to learn more, or if they're interested in actually finding out how they can pull themselves into a higher level of performance.
Fantastic. Dr. Orr, thank you again so much for coming on today. Folks, you check it out. Axion Neurotherapy. We'll have a post. We'll have a link right there on the post so that you can check this out. Fascinating stuff. And I think, just from what we've talked about today, people are going to be able to recognize things that they may not have understood what's going on. So huge benefit and just, big time over delivery today with this. So I thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack.
All right, folks, there it is. Check it out. Check out Dr. Orr's AxionNeurotherapy.com. And until next time, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.